And hello again to everyone. This is our regular segment, Answers to Your Questions. The next frequently asked question is about what? The reason for coral death? The main reason is the instability of your phosphate. Phosphate in the aquarium can depend on various factors. We absolutely do not recommend feeding your corals with phosphate-containing food. So if you feed your corals with phosphate-containing food, which includes Reefroid, Polylab Booster, Ulstrafast, in other words, almost all coral foods contain a large amount of phosphate. Accordingly, if you have fed your corals with such food, then about an hour later, you can test the water in your aquarium and see a phosphate increase of about 200%, sometimes up to 300%. It all depends on the amount of this food given. For example, after 12 or 24 hours the next day, you perform a phosphate test and see the same phosphate readings that you had before you used this food. That is, there is a sharp fluctuation, a rapid rise in phosphate, followed by a rapid drop. This causes the death of any corals, whether it's Euphyllia, Acropora, Donus, or other corals. Everything can die because of such a sharp fluctuation in phosphate. In the moment, this might not happen, meaning it could occur after 3 to 4 such feedings. So, if you regularly feed your corals with this food, you will see constant mortality. Of some corals, one might die by morning, then another, a third, some strange occurrences like that. Accordingly, you need to take this into account. And if you are still an advocate of feeding corals, then it's better to use, for example, AB+. It practically does not cause this sharp spike in phosphate, meaning it contains something nutritious, but won't cause the same problems as other foods that contain organic phosphate. Why this phosphate is not retained? Well, for example, as I said, it rises sharply and then falls sharply because it is an organic form of phosphate, and accordingly this phosphate causes the same effects as real chemical phosphate in your water. I am speaking in layman's terms to avoid confusing you with any chemical terminology. So imagine that organic phosphate is a trace of organic matter that suddenly enters the water in large quantities and then it decreases just as sharply. That is, organic phosphate can decrease sharply, unlike chemical phosphate. That is, the chemical phosphate that is produced in your aquarium through some biological processes or dosing will be more stable. The biological phosphate, which is organic, can rise sharply and fall sharply at any moment. The same effect can occur due to very nutritious fish feeds. That is, you can feed the fish with such feeds that can also be very phosphate rich. These feeds may include spirulina containing nori feed. That is, all these plant-based feeds will sharply increase your phosphate levels, and that's why you might see problems. Some issues with corals at the moment. That is, your corals die as soon as you feed them, usually not on the same day but the next day or the day after. This all happens due to phosphate shock. Remember, 95%. The problems of coral death are always based on phosphate shock. It's all due to sudden fluctuations in phosphate levels.